You Can't Make Me. Working with Students with Oppositional Defiant Behaviors with Bev Johns. May 15th, 2024. Cirque's Wisdom Wednesday webinar series.
Hi, and welcome to our May Wisdom Wednesday webinar. This is our last webinar of this school year. Today we have Dr. Bev Johns joining us. She's got a background in special education and working with students with significant emotional and behavioral disabilities. So Bev, we are so happy to have you here with us today. And once you get started and once our webinar is complete today, this will be on our website and archived when you go to okcirc.org. And under Wisdom Wednesday, there's an archive button. So all of our presentations will be archived, and this recording should be there in the next 2 weeks. Bev, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to be here. So you can get started whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, good afternoon. I hope this finds everybody doing wonderful. I am delighted to be with you today to talk about the children who say, "You can't make me," working with students with oppositional defiant behaviors. And you might be saying, there seem to be more of those children, don't there? And the answer is yes. So I thought I'd give you just a little bit about my background. I am a writer as well, and having worked with students with the most significant emotional and behavioral disorders, but these happened to be the first two books that I ever wrote. The Alternatives to Suspension is in the 5th edition, and the Aggression book is in the 4th edition. But I do come to you with 40 years of experience working with children with emotional and behavioral disorders. And as I reflect back and think of the wonderful memories that I have, at this time of working with children, I'll share with you the case of the dangling earring. You probably cannot see my ears, but I do have dangling earrings on today. But what you need to know is that they're clip earrings, because when I was a brand new teacher, I accepted a position working with children who had significant emotional and behavioral disorders. And I accepted the position in December to start right after the holidays. Now, I should have thought that might be a little suspicious when they had a teacher leave the classroom in December. But I had finished my master's degree. I had done a great deal of work in applied behavior analysis. So I thought, well, I can do this job. And after all, there's only 7 children in the classroom. Piece of cake. And I have all of this training. Why, I'm not going to have any trouble at all. Well, I got into my classroom, and those 7 children had just a whole array of behavioral problems, including little Jimmy. And little Jimmy was actually a beautiful little boy, but he had a whole repertoire of behaviors such as kicking, biting, scratching, spitting, pulling. And so I was a brand new teacher. And what do? Why, I go to school with my big dangly earrings on, because I think I want to look my best for my students. And guess what Jimmy did one day? Among his, and I'll tell you, the first 2 weeks of school, I went home with scratch marks, bite marks. I thought, what have I gotten myself into here? But I persevered. So one day, Jimmy's pulling. He's in the mood to pull. And sure enough, those dangling earrings were certainly very tempting, and he pulled my ears. And my ears were pierced at that time. And what you can't see is that one of my ears is all the way out. And it's a reminder about you need to be careful what you wear. And so you might be saying, well, why doesn't the lady just get her ears repaired? Well, there are two reasons. I'm a cheapskate and I'm a scaredy cat. So as I wear my clip earrings, I always think about Jimmy. But the lesson that was learned there was, remember, I went into that classroom as a brand new teacher with a master's degree thinking I have all the answers. Oh, no, no, no. I did not. Far from it did I have the answer to, all of the issues. To this day, I can honestly say I don't have all of the answers. I may know what works for me in given situations. So it says to us, we have to be lifelong learners. And about the time we think we have figured out everything that a student could possibly do, they come up with something that we have never dealt with before. So I was also the administrator of an alternative school for children with significant behavioral and emotional issues, kindergarten level all the way through high school. And I was a professional fellow at McMurray College in Jacksonville. I've written over 25 books about students with emotional and behavioral disorders. And why I like this field is because it's detective work. When children do something, we have to figure out why they're doing it. And we may not always know all the reasons, and our children today are complicated. So I like the work. Actually, I also write murder mysteries on the side. So, because I do like detective work. So, this is just one of our latest projects that I'm doing with two other colleagues. I'm also working on a book on oppositional defiant disorders, but we're working on one that talks about the restorative aspects of the arts with children. So, that's another project because the arts really give children an opportunity. To experience ways to express their emotions that are appropriate for them. So I also put in here a link for you. I don't know how many of you read the Attitude magazine, but one of my articles on auditory processing was picked as one of the top 25. Now, I just tell you this because this is a really good resource for a lot of excellent articles that have been done in the area of attention deficit disorder. So, what are our outcomes today? To talk about the characteristics of children with oppositional defiant disorders. And we all have biases. We need to recognize them. But yes, is it hard for us to recognize them? You better believe it. But with these children, it's really important that we talk about that and to recognize the key components of an evaluation. And then, most importantly, to talk about key strategies for working with children. So let's do a little Wheel of Fortune, and I'll just give you a minute or so to see if you can fill in the blanks on these effective behavioral interventions for children with oppositional defiant behaviors. And maybe if you want to put them in the chat or you just want to do it yourself, whatever, that is fine.
Bev, is that first one praise?
It is praise.
Okay.
Yeah, we say, well, of course we use praise. Well, children with oppositional defiant disorders are probably the most difficult children to praise because if people are honest, they get on their nerves. I mean, and they really get agitated with them, and we're going to talk more about that. But the first one is praise, and even more important is behavior specific praise because it's a form of teaching. We're teaching the children what is it that we like about what they do as opposed to good boy or good girl, and they're saying what is it that I did well rather than saying thank you for raising your hand or thank you for walking in the hall. So how about the second one?
I don't know if I know that one.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Um, I love Wheel of Fortune, and we often chuckle. My husband's father, who is now deceased, you never called at 6:30 in the evening because that interfered with Wheel of Fortune. So it's choice. And we're going to talk more about choice because children with oppositional defiant disorders need voice. They need to feel like they are recognized for what they are doing. And one of the best ways we can do that is to give them choice. Now, the next one gets a little tougher. Everybody know that one? Hint, it's something that we tend to use with children with autism, but it has a lot of possibilities for children with oppositional defiant disorders, and it's known as PREMAC principle. So if you've worked with children with autism, you know that a lot of times we do the first, then. So first you do the behavior that is not preferred, that you don't really want to do. And next, you get to do the preferred behavior. I always say I use this a lot in graduate school. I'd have to take a test. And I mean, the minute that test was over, I would go out and buy a pair of shoes because I love shoes. So I was using PREMAC principle on myself. The kicker with PREMAC principle is the child has to have the skill to do the non-preferred activity. A lot of times we ask a child to do something and they don't have the skill to do it. And we say, well, we'll reward you if you do it, but they can't do it. So we're setting up for failure. So we have to really be really mindful about what we're doing. How about the next one, which is 2 words?
Something cards, I assume.
Okay. Oh, very good. Cards, response cards. So it's an alternative to hand raising. Again, what you want to do is involve our children with oppositional defiant behaviors. And one of the ways we can do that, because a lot of our children who, if they don't know the answer to something, they do slink down in the chair and say, I hope the teacher doesn't call on me. So response cards give and a lot of us now use clickers in the classroom. We use polls, etc. So response cards give every student, again, voice, the chance to answer a question. It's an alternative to hand raising. And the last one, and this is 2 words as well.
Oh, I hear BCBA friends talk about this, behavior momentum. Is that
Oh,
right?
wonderful, wonderful. Absolutely. It's behavior momentum. If we want a child to do something difficult, we need to give them 3, and some people would say as many as 5 easy tasks to do. So what we're doing, it's like a snowball. We're building momentum for success for children. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because it's a powerful teaching tool. So now, why are these children difficult for us? Because are they? Yes. A friend of mine likes to say these are the children who are labor intensive. They require a lot of us, and we are probably going home tired at the end of the day because they may be a drain. Now, and there's a reason for that. Comorbidity is a rule. We're going to talk about that. These children don't just have oppositional defiant disorder. They may have a lot of other things going on, and especially a lot of things internally that we can't see. And then they challenge our competence, just like me thinking, I am the expert here with these 7 little children, and I didn't know what I was doing. They challenged my competence. And then the bottom line is we can't fix everything. So we really want to, because we got into the field of education because we're helpers. We want to help, but we can't always fix everything. And sometimes that's very hard for us to accept. I mean, because we try, but sometimes we have to say to ourselves, what is it that we can fix? What is it that uh, we can do that will result in the child having a pleasant, environment at school And then we know they fight, flight, or freeze. And everybody knows hopefully what the Q-tip method is. Quit taking it personally, because these children will say things to you that offend you. I mean, I have to be honest, I didn't like it when the children called me fatty or thunder thighs or some other names that they might call me. But I had to learn that I couldn't take that personally because they were lashing out and trying to find the magic thing that would get to me. So, and it's really important because we're reading more and more, and we know the importance of the mental health of teachers as well as the mental health of our children. If I have no food, I can't give the child any. If my emotional needs are drained, I can't give the children the emotional support they need. So that's why we have to take care of ourselves as well. And then what about attentional bias? Well, this is a big thing. If you stop and think about it, what do we tend to focus on at the end of the day? We may have had a really good day with students, but oh my goodness, with Steve, we had some challenges. And what do we focus on at the end of the day? We don't focus on what went well. We focus on negative information. If you do evaluations, what's the first thing I look at for evaluation is the negative comments. There could be 55 positive ones, and then there's one negative one. And because that's what our brain is wired to pay more attention to negative information. That's why our children with oppositional defiant behaviors are difficult for us, because we're looking for the negative and they're looking for the negative. And they're looking for threats. And frankly, we may be afraid. Oh my gosh, we're going to this class. Is he going to behave? Am I going to have to take him out of class, et cetera, et cetera? So one of the things we also know is that children with, anxiety, and you're going to hear me talk about a number of our children with ODD have anxiety, and we don't always think of that. So they may avoid things and they may procrastinate, and procrastination might be fear. So something to think about. And then other kinds of bias would include confirmational bias, when we accept information that affirms our original belief while rejecting anything contrary. So let us say we get the records for a student and we've heard from the other teachers that, oh my gosh, you're getting Jason in your classroom, look out. The first time Jason misbehaves, what are we saying? Well, that was it. Records are right. Everything is right. It confirms that he has oppositional defiant behaviors. Or this one for our students with oppositional defiant behaviors, fundamental attribution. We blame the person and don't recognize the systemic facts. So we're all reading a lot about children who have experienced trauma. And though we will say, well, he just did that deliberately. Well, maybe not. Maybe this child has been abused the night before he comes to school. So there are a lot of things that are going on. And then binary bias, which is an either or. Well, they're either wonderful or they're not. And we put them into categories. And then hostile attributions. The child does something and we interpret that behavior as having hostile intent, when it might not have been that at all. And then something known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is our cognitive bias, where people with little expertise or ability assume they know it all. Like I probably went in, I was the Dunning-Kruger effect. Well, I know it all, and assumed I had all this superior expertise. I didn't have that at all. And then sometimes those same people don't don't have enough knowledge to know they don't have enough knowledge. And in the schools today, do we take a lot of criticism from a lot of people who have not been um, in our shoes? And I always say we have to be very cautious, and actually, when a teacher is having difficulty with a child, we need to read that as a sign that person needs support and help. But what do we tend to do? Well, if she would just do this, she wouldn't have these problems. And so our mindset really has to change, um, to think about an educator is having trouble with a student. What can I do to help that educator? Because they need assistance. They don't need criticism because their position is difficult enough. And so if we think about our own bias, I mean, we all have biases, and they really impact our work with children with oppositional defiant behaviors. So why are we seeing more? Certainly after the pandemic, we saw a change in adults and we saw a change in children, because there was obviously a huge change in how we did things. Children were going to school online. They had been used to going to school in person, etc. So executive function skills are not what they were before, that ability to kind of like get it all together, because people had a different routine and our children had a different routine. And then we talk about emotional regulation and cognitive flexibility, which is that ability to be able to move smoothly from one activity to another, and handling, oops, our structure was changed. What do I do now? And then in processing information. We know also that students may be as much as 2 years behind socially and emotionally. We've had an increase in trauma in our students. Dr. Karen Gross, who's one of the leading experts in trauma, talks about believing that every student and every adult has experienced trauma. And so if we put on that trauma lens, we sometimes, this does help us understand why some children do what they do. And then children are grieving. If you know the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying, when children lose things, they go through, and when parents or when someone dies, you go through different stages of grief. And some of our children, the part of the grieving process is anger. And so children and adults are angry. For a period of time, they lost out on some things. And then our society has become desensitized to aggression. We allow much more aggression, and people say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. No, it really shouldn't be the way it is. We need to focus on giving children alternatives to aggressive behavior. And then an increase in toxins in the environment. That's what I was working on yesterday, because it's a very serious problem that we have a lot of toxic chemicals in our environment. We have a lot of children have come to school with lead poisoning, and lead poisoning clearly impacts behavior. There's a reduction in time to play, because a lot of people will say, what is it that is different now than it was? And there is research out there that talks about that we're not giving children enough time to play. And then the impact of social media, isolation. It's something I look at when I look at auditory processing as well, because if children are engaged in social media, oftentimes they are tuning out what's happening around them. So if somebody asks them a question, they've tuned you out. So just another issue. And then, the drug crisis. So incidence rates anywhere from 1 to 16% of all school-age children have ODD. They may not have been diagnosed, but then again, they might have been. And so what are the behaviors displayed? You all know these because if you're in the classroom, you see them. They're argumentative. What do you mean I got to do that? I don't want to do that. And you can't make me do that. Or as I remember, one of my students used to say, "You can't make me do that. You're violating my constitutional rights." So, they come up with quite a few arguments about why they're not going to do what you would like them to do. And they're irritable and they have a negative attitude. Remember the whole notion of bias. They're focused more on negative. We tend to focus on negative, so it's a vicious cycle. And then they're uncooperative on purpose. This may be surface behavior, and that's one of the things we have to look at. And they're angry and they defy the rules. It's the rule rather than the exception is comorbidity. So a number of our students with ADHD may also have ODD. 12% of young children with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, have oppositional defiant disorder. I'm really interested in this topic because I worked with a little guy and he was 8. And he would get very, very upset if his math paper touched his reading paper, touched his science paper. And so his teacher did a wonderful job. She got him those little mailboxes, and so the reading papers could go in one slot and the math papers in one, the social studies in one, and the science ones in one. Well, one day there was a substitute in his classroom, and she thought, well, what is the big deal? So I mix up the reading and the math. Oh my gosh, 2-hour meltdown. And was very particular about his clothes, what he ate, etc. So some of our children, and we're seeing an increase in children with obsessive compulsive disorder, especially when they get to middle school and they have to move from class to class. When they're younger and they're with one teacher, the teacher will give them extra time to do things so that they can take the time to do it perfectly. But then when they get to middle school and it's time to move around from class to class, that's a problem for them. So anxiety disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, 40%. But what we tend to focus on the oppositional behavior because we can see it. What we can't see is the turmoil that is going on internally with them. Autism and ODD, disruptive mood dysregulation, we see that in a high percentage of children. So just, some things we see that are comorbid, which is why when we're trying to help the children, we have to have a really good whole picture of what is going on with the student, and we can't cut corners on an evaluation. And what we know now is that ODD is really a disorder of emotional regulation. They cannot control their emotions. So we see that as well with our children with ADHD. So behavior is the cover. The external behavior we see, but we don't understand always what's going on internally with the child. It could also be a sensory processing disorder, could be LD, could be a motor problem, could be language problems. So there are a lot of other things that can be going on. So we really have to kick in to our detective mode to try to figure out why children are doing what they're doing.
Hey, Bev.
Yes.
And this, I don't want to veer us off topic or anything, but I'm just out of curiosity. What I'm hearing a lot of from schools is this new diagnosis that students are receiving that's not quite recognized in our DSM, but it's apparently in the UK, it falls under like autism and anxiety, this pathological demand avoidance, PDA.
Yes, I was just reading more on that days ago.
Okay,
Um,
okay, and it
yeah,
seems to kind of have some overlap here with some of these when I see the
it
anxiety,
does.
the morbidity and autism and all of that. I just didn't know if you had
Yes,
seen a bit of that crop up as well.
yeah. There's not been that much done on it yet,
Right, right.
but that is, yes, that is coming out, no question. So think about a student with whom you worked. Actually, that fed into the, to the comment. What other comorbidities may exist? I gave you the example of the child with ODD who also had obsessive compulsive disorder. And if you tried to just deal with the ODD, you were missing the boat because you also had to work with the in fact the obsessive compulsive disorder. So just be thinking about that. Um, and then one of these statements is a lie. Which one? A, oppositional defiant disorder generally shows up before the age of 8. B, behaviors of students with oppositional defiance last over 6 months. And C, ODD and conduct disorders are the same thing. So which do you think is a lie?
I think historically, and maybe still now, that ODD and conduct disorders have been thought of as the same thing. But with you just saying that it's really an emotional
Yep.
regulation issue,
Mhm,
and then one of the
mhm.
participants is saying C as well, thinking
And
that
that
that might be the lie.
and that's the key. C is a lie. ODD and conduct disorders are not the same thing. When you think about, because I also worked with children with conduct disorders, and those were the students who might go vandalize the cemetery locally. Now, they planned that. And there was no issue with emotional regulation. They were regulating what they wanted to do, or they decided to go rip off the Walmart. They planned that. So that's the difference. Children with oppositional defiant disorder are not able to regulate themselves. Children with conduct disorders are able. Now, that's not to say you can't have both, because you can, but boy, this gets very, very difficult to determine. And I think you really have to look closely at whether they're able to emotionally regulate. And then just some more factors. It was just reading a couple days ago the importance, what's happening with a lot of our children with ADHD who also have ODD is they are very frightened of rejection. And we don't tend to think of that. We think, oh, they're pretty sure of themselves. No, they're not. They are frightened of rejection, and they might engage in behaviors for that would let us know that they're afraid of being rejected. So just so many things that are indicated here. So let's picture this sequence. So we have a child who is sitting in the classroom, and the teacher is lecturing. And the teacher's lecturing maybe too long, but anyway, what happens with the child with ADHD? Their mind wanders, right? Our minds wander. So they wander, and then they come back to attention and they say, oh my gosh, I don't have a clue what the teacher just said. And they become very anxious. So, ADHD, they realize they haven't been paying attention, they're anxious, and then the teacher calls on them. And what do you think they do? I'm not answering that blankety blank question. That's stupid. ODD, look. So, all of them can go together, and it was just one sequence of things that we tend to see with our children. So that's why our evaluation components have to be thorough, multidisciplinary, and it doesn't usually exist in isolation. And and never assume the child will outgrow the behaviors. That is a common thing that we fall into this trap, that we may be working with 5 or 6-year-olds and they're engaging in oppositional behavior. And we say, well, we'll just ignore it because they'll outgrow it. They do not outgrow it. Walker's got a lot of research on the fact they are not going to outgrow it. So be very careful. That's why I'm a firm believer in early identification and deep dive evaluations. We have to do the whole picture because everything is connected. And if we fail to recognize something, we may not be planning appropriate behavioral interventions for that child because we're not looking at a holistic approach. And so here comes the judge. So what do you think was the ruling here? The student had been found eligible for special education under other health impaired for conduct problems, social maladjustment, possible post-traumatic stress disorder. The student was to get counseling services. The student did not get counseling service. Parents maintained that his mental health needs justified counseling. Was compensatory service ordered? Yes or no?
Was this in a due process case?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
I would say yes.
And yes, compensatory service was ordered. Because look, it's very interesting that, they placed under other health impaired, which was saying, he had issues, but by their own admission, conduct problems. But they were saying, well, conduct problems are not our problems to resolve, and there was possible post-traumatic stress disorder. That's why a thorough evaluation is critical. Here's another one. Student was diagnosed with conduct, bipolar, and ADHD. Parents wanted special education. School district said the behaviors were manifested as conduct disorder, and they did not believe he was eligible under IDEA. What other factors should you look at? Allison, what do you think on that one?
They base it just on him not meeting a category criteria. I mean, because you still have to look at the adverse
Right.
impact on their educational day and
Right.
yeah.
Right. You clearly would look at the adverse effect on educational performance. And not to say all children with oppositional defiant have it manifested in academics, but in many cases, yes, it is. And so what was the adverse effect? Well, thank you. Okay. So you always ask yourself these questions. Are there medical reasons the student becomes argumentative? I worked with children who were on numbers of medication, 5, 6 medications. And if for some reason one of those meds was out of whack, or they forgot to take one of the meds before they came to school, was there a change in behavior? Yes. So has the student experienced trauma? And is there a social skill deficit? And then we always want to look at, for every negative behavior, there's an opposite behavior that we want from the child. And we have to recognize that desirable behavior, because if we don't recognize that desirable behavior, the child is not going to continue it. So we assess, just like we do in academics. Is it a skill deficit? If it's a performance deficit, fluency. So skill means the child doesn't know what to do in a given setting. A lot of people say, well, they should just know how to behave. Well, when we go into new settings, do we sometimes wonder what the criteria for behavior is? Yes, we do. So if we don't know what is expected of us, it's a skill deficit, and we can't do it. It's a skill deficit. If we know what is expected of us, and we can do it some of the time, but then again, there's a substitute, or there's a change in routine, or we're with our friends, maybe a performance deficit, and then a fluency deficit, which means it doesn't come automatically to us. If we think of learning to drive a car, when we first started, we had a skill deficit. Well, and then as we got used to driving the car, we were doing pretty good, but consistently we may not have been the best driver. And then the fluency. Now think about fluency in driving a car. You actually do it automatically. You get in the car, and you wonder by the time you got there how you got there. You just did it automatically. It was fluent for you. When in doubt, if it's a skill deficit, performance deficit, or fluency deficit, assume it's a skill deficit and teach the skills you want, and then reinforce the skills you want. Very, very important. Every time you see the child doing what they're supposed to do, we need to reinforce. Model the behavior. We have to be role models and let the students know through behavior rehearsal, through pre-correction. Let them know at the front end what you want from them. And the last one is we have to teach our children that aggression is not appropriate in school. I have gone into schools and the school's out of control, and they wonder how they got out of control. They were ignoring a lot of little things. And when you ignore low level aggression, it always is going to turn into high level aggression. That's one of the best books I ever read on this topic. Was Arnold Goldstein, who is now deceased, wrote a book on low level aggression, first steps in the ladder to high level aggression. Very, very important. We have to catch children engaging in low level aggression, and we have to correct privately, and we have to teach them what we expect from them. And
Hey,
is
Bev,
it hard? Yes,
I have a question about that, just in terms of like the behavioral approach that you hear, I mean, a lot of when you're doing like an FBA and determine that the student's looking for that attention, no matter what kind of attention. And often we'll see in a BIP like a recommendation to ignore low level behavior. And then when I hear you say this, is it differentiating like low level stuff that are like comments or work avoidance, things like that, but you draw the line at the low level aggression? Is that what you would recommend? Because I want to make sure that there's clarity there when you hear it from some behavioral experts saying you must ignore low level behavior, but you draw that line at aggression. Is that the difference, or what are your thoughts there?
yeah, because it's some people will say don't sweat the small stuff, but I would add don't sweat the small stuff unless it's aggression. If
Okay.
it's any form of aggression, because we see patterns. That's how stealing starts. That's how lying starts. That's how the destruction of property starts. On and on and on with those low level things. So, for instance, a child throws a book on the floor, or throws a piece of paper on the floor, and people say, oh, well, it's not a big deal. Well, if you allow that, then you better be prepared, because he's going to continue to throw paper on the floor. And his little neighbors are going to do the same thing because they're seeing that it is allowed. And pretty soon the room is a mess. So ask yourself, is it aggression? If it is aggression, do not ignore it. Again, pull the child, use it as a teachable moment, pull the child aside. Don't ever do it in front of other students. Pull them aside and say, what you did was this, and we don't have that in this classroom. That's not acceptable behavior. So you teach them. Incidentally, it's hard to teach social skills because everybody has different expectations.
Right.
Go to the first period class, the teacher's got a set of expectations. The second period, they've got a different set of expectations. And the child is saying, well, what on earth is going on? What am I supposed to do? Especially children with oppositional behaviors, because they're going to test. And what one teacher allows in his or her classroom, another teacher doesn't allow. And so continually, children get what we see are mixed messages. And so it's hard. So, and then if they learn it wrong, it's harder to unlearn and learn correctly. So let's say the child moves to X school, to Lincoln School. And last year they were at Jefferson School. In Jefferson School, let them run the hall. But then they come to Lincoln School and they're getting in trouble because they can't run in the hall. And they said, but I did it at Jefferson School. But it's not acceptable behavior at Lincoln School. So you have to, on the front end, teach the children, because once they've learned it wrong, it is very difficult to change the behavior. And the big thing is, a lot of times what we do is the student engages in a totally inappropriate behavior. And so we say, okay, that's a 2-day suspension. Well, that teaches us a lot, doesn't it? That teaches us we get a vacation from school. I always share the story. There was a school superintendent who went into a school, and he went into a school district, and they were having problems with the little kindergartners running in the hall. And so he said, I'm going to send them a message. Kick them all out for 2 days for running in the hall. Well, what message did that say to a little kindergarten? Oh, if I don't want to go to school, I should just run in the hall, because then I'm going to get sent home. Wouldn't a better approach have been, I'm going to teach the children how to walk in the hall. I'm going to put up visual cues. I'm going to reinforce them for walking in the hall. And we will tend to accommodate children with other disabilities much more than we will accommodate children with behavioral problems. That's just the reality of the situation. And there's a lot of research also that says if people can see the disability, they are more likely to accommodate than if they cannot see the disability. And again, so let's look at some of our attitudinal kinds of things. So we might say, he can do it, he just won't. Well, what we need to say is, I need to check to see if the student is able to do the task. Or he's just acting like a big baby. I need to check on what his social emotional level is. I have a friend, and her little 5-year-old is the biggest 5-year-old I have ever seen. And I think this poor 5-year-old, because he looks like he could be 10 or 11, people will assume he's going to act like a 10 or 11-year-old. He's only 5 years old. So he's not acting like a big baby. I mean, that's his level. And he just takes his time doing everything I want him to do. I need to check what is processing time and the class clown. So always looking for if the student is covering for something they cannot do, because our children with ODD cover by acting up when there may be something else going on. And then controlling our own behavior. We talked about this.
So sorry, there's a question about the previous statement from one of the attendees in terms of the private correction, and at what point, if the student is misbehaving and it's a class-wide expectation, how do you differentiate between correcting that student's behavior privately versus reminding the entire class of the expectation?
Excellent. What you can do, and what I recommend, is if you're having an issue with a particular behavior, do behavior rehearsal. For instance, when we're in the hall, this is what we do. And then I reinforce the students who are doing what they're supposed to be doing, depending upon the age of the student. I do not like to correct students in front of other students. I just have a really big problem with it not being respectful. I mean, all of us have probably been totally embarrassed when somebody corrected us in front of other people. And what we're trying to do is establish relationships with children. And if we're correcting them in front of other children, that tends to be problematic, and that tends to hurt our relationship. We're going to get the same result if we call the student to the side and say, hey, I saw you doing this, that's not appropriate here. And if you start correcting older students, in front of other older students, they're going to come out fighting. That really is not going to get you anywhere. So that was an excellent question. Thank you. And again, avoiding letting the students know that their behavior is getting to you. And we have to know our own triggers. There are some things that children might say that trigger a negative reaction from us. I'll give you an example. I was working with some teachers who work in a correctional facility, and one of the students was making some pretty inappropriate sexual comments. Well, this teacher had been sexually abused, and this teacher was having a very hard time, understandably so. That was a trigger for her. And then ask ourselves, do I give more reprimands and positive comments to the students? That's what we don't want to do, because then we're going home at the end of the day saying, oh gosh, all I did was say, don't do this, don't do that. We need to reframe that and be positive. This is a chart that I did because there was a school that had a very high number of incident reports that resulted in police calls. And so I had the opportunity to look at the incident reports, and there was a common theme through the incident reports. So the child was engaging in oppositional behavior. Well, if the adult was emotionally regulated and was remaining calm and redirected and gave the student time to process, the end of it. But here's what happened in those incident reports. The child was engaging in negative behaviors. So then the adult was struggling to emotionally regulate, and they started raising their voice and they started getting too close to the student. Then what happened? The child escalated, argued back, yelled. The adult then escalated, gave ultimatums, you'll do it or else, raising the voice. The student loses control, and the student has the police call. That was the scenario in all of those incident reports. It was heartbreaking. If they just could have, regulated. Now, is it hard to regulate ourselves? You better believe it is. But at some point, some of us have to say, I'm losing it. I need to get somebody else to take over for me, because when we're losing it, the child is going to lose it. So it was a sad commentary, but it causes all of us to reflect on how we as adults are regulating. So when I'm having a problem, the first place I need to look is myself. And then, as a friend of mine says, knowledge doesn't always translate into action. So I can do a lot of workshops and talk about, the importance of being positive with the children and praise them, et cetera, et cetera. Just because I know to do it doesn't mean I do it. So, like, I happen to know what I have to do to lose weight. Sure, I have to pull myself away from the table. I got to walk more. I got to do more exercise, blah, blah, blah. But does it necessarily translate into action? And no, it doesn't. So one of the things that I encourage educators to do is to tape themselves. Pick a period of the day when you're having difficulty with a student, and now it's easier to do, on your phone, tape yourself. You are not taping the child, you are taping yourself. And then at the end of the day, take it home in the privacy of your own home and listen to the number of positive statements you made in that 30-minute period, number of reprimands, and number of words and directions. And I used to always do this with my college students. I worked with college who were working in classes with children with behavioral and emotional disorders, and they were trying to get their license. So they had to work all day and go to school at night. And oh, what fun that had to be for them. But one night, one of my students came in and I said, and he was just really down. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I knew that tape was on." He said, "I just listened to it." He said, "I didn't give any positive statements. It was reprimands for that whole 30 minutes." I said, "But look at it this way. What does it say to you that you need to do? How can we, improve the number of positive statements?" Um, so that really is very important because, you know, a lot of people would say collect data and let the data and have the educator collect the data and have them speak for itself, rather than somebody coming in and saying, well, if you just give a few more positive comments. Well, some people might say, well, if you think you can do it, go ahead and try. But if we self monitor, we have a much better chance of changing our behavior. And then check your four corners. This is something I did, because I always like to check whether I was actually moving around the room. So when I'd be in the front right corner, I just put a little sticky note up. It's in the back left corner, put a little sticky note. And at the end of the day, I'd look at where I spent a lot of my time. And if it said to me, "You're spending a lot of time in the left front of the room, maybe I better be moving around more." It's called supportive proximity control. And it's not proximity control to say, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. It's supportive proximity control, meaning, how can I help you? Is that math problem difficult? What can I help you with it? So,
Hey, Bev.
uh-huh.
Uh, I love the idea of the self-monitoring because I know it's really hard, especially when you're a teacher with these students that are struggling with behavior, and it can be frustrating to the teacher. And I'm thinking back to that beginning slide where you talked about all the things to help with the behavior, the praise and all of that. What like tip do you have? Because I know you mentioned this at the beginning, when teachers are struggling with, what do I have to praise this kiddo on? Like, how do I increase my number of positive comments I give
Mhm.
this kiddo when it's constant struggling?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Y- You have to really look for appropriate behavior. You have to be able to see progress in small little steps. I think that was the thing that kept me going for so many years with children with behavior problems. When they'd have like a 5 or 10 minute period of time when they did well, I mean, I'm going to make a big deal out of it. And so I also worked with a number of children who were passive aggressive. So those are the kids who put the head down on the desk and say, "I ain't doing that math and you can't make me." And they happen to be right. You can't make them do the math if they don't want to do it. So I was working with this young man, smart as all get out. He could do work above grade level, but he put the head down on the desk, say, "I ain't doing it." So I'd move away. The minute that head came up and he picked up a pencil, you better believe I was right over there and say, "You really made a good decision. Can I help you with it?" So that made a difference, but we also have to train ourselves to look for everything they do well, because the children are reprimand magnets. They set themselves up for us to reprimand them, but really important for us to look for what we can recognize. And I don't mean praise that is not warranted. I mean, look for what, they have done well. I remember one day we had 10 students who came in on one bus. 9 of them had a problem on the bus that day. But the 10th one, which would have been the one that I thought would cause a problem on the bus, he stayed out of it. Well, you know, I called him aside and I said, "I am so proud." And this was a high school student. I said, "I am really proud of you there was a problem on the bus and you stayed out of it. I know, you know, how hard that should have been. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. Boy, he welled up like, oh, okay. Uh, because he was probably expecting that I was going to think. And frankly, I did at the beginning. Luckily, I kept my mouth shut. I thought, oh, he probably was in on it too. No, he wasn't. So when a child makes a mistake, we need to have empathy for them. I mean, the math task may be hard for them. I was called in for oppositional defiant behavior in this class in a classroom because, the teacher would do the lecture on the concept, and then the teacher would give one example. And the child didn't know what he was supposed to do, so he'd just take the paper and he'd rip it up, throw it on the ground. Well, one of the things we discovered was one example was not enough for him. He needed more examples. So, again, empathy saying, I know right now this is really tough for you. Insight, which would include, I think maybe if you tried this step, it might help you. I found it helped me when I was doing that. So insight and then optimism. And you know what? I bet next time you can remember that and do that. So empathy, having a feel for what they're going through, insight, and optimism. And sometimes I have the right to remain silent. I just don't have the ability. The less talking we do, the better. And with children, and sometimes we insist on giving them this long lecture. Well, let me tell you, they're not processing it. I know some teachers who actually don't give auditory directions; they only show the child with visuals how to do something. And then building relationships, because it's all about building relationships. If we don't have those with children, it's really problematic. So we have to build on their strengths and interests. That's why I love the arts, because there are no mistakes in art. We have to give children hope. Micro adventures. Actually, there was an ADHD study where people were asked what was the thing when they were getting stressed about, what could they do and what did they do to relieve their stress? And the number one answer was they went out in nature. Now, we can't always do that depending upon the weather, but we can look at what we can do in the classroom to have those nature activities. Community service is a big one. Someday in school, I'd like to, and you have the children tell you what they like to do. You can do it, today in school, I'd like to, and then you honor that. Now you have to work with the children on what is reasonable to do at school. And then the 2x10, probably most of you are very familiar with this, which is taking 2 minutes every day for 10 days to talk to the child, not related to schoolwork, about what their interests are. It's a little thing, but it really does work. Moving stories where you, in fact, have children finish the ending of a story. And I'm a firm believer in reading stories to children at all levels that give them hope. I think, some of our children see enough violence. They don't need to come to school and read about it. And we want things that are happy endings. So, any of you have ideas? Because relationships are critical.
I think having these reminders are huge. The 2x10 I had heard of, but it's so easy to forget, forget
Mhm,
that stuff,
mhm.
if it's not a part of your daily practice, that's embedded and you're constantly reminding yourself.
Exactly. To just take those few minutes and listen to the child, and what they're interested in, and without passing a value judgment on them. They
Mhm.
don't really need that. So, and then basic behavior management, my best tip is be positive, be brief, and be gone. So this was coined by a good friend of mine, Eleanor Getzlow, many, many years ago. She said, if you don't learn anything else, do this.
Mm.
Positive, brief, and be gone, which is, I need you to start your math. Okay, that's easy enough. But here's the kicker. The last part is be gone. We don't want to be gone. We want to hover over the students until they do what we say they're supposed to do. No, when we give them the positive statement and it's brief, then we need to move away from them. Why is that? It allows them to save face. And here's the other thing, it allows them to process the information. Remember when I talked at the beginning about a lot of our children have auditory processing issues. They're worried about what's happening, and we're giving them multiple directions. It's just too much for them. Move away from them.
Bev, I've even experienced this with my own child at home, even just privately, giving her an instruction or giving her praise. It's, even just here, it's not about necessarily embarrassment, but she'll tell me, she's like, get out of my space now. And
Yeah,
I think she's like overwhelmed with the feedback and the sensory stuff. So I see that frequently, even if it's just her and I here in the house. So I think, like I said, all of these are great reminders. You've got a couple of questions and comments here, if I can
sure.
share those. So this one is asking if ODD can show an adverse impact on education. Should evaluators consider that under that other health impairment category for IDEA eligibility?
Well, again, they could decide it under other health impaired. They could also decide it under emotional disturbance
Okay.
as another
Another
category.
consideration. Okay.
Then again, we can get into those discussion about what really is the primary issue
Right.
versus
Right.
what isn't. Generally, the ODD is going to be the primary issue with a number of the children, but then you look at it and you say, oh my gosh, he's got a learning disability in the area of written expression.
Right. What is that underlying cause that's making those ODD behaviors come out?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So I think it's just very complicated sometimes to make that determination. Um,
And then this person comments that I see so many teachers that are dysregulated and continuing to ramp students up, and that school districts need more training or better mental health support, maybe, I don't know, but more training on how to remain calm and stay regulated in these environments. Do you have additional tips on that? I know some of that was the self-monitoring, but uh,
yeah,
how
it
teachers can keep that calm when students are dysregulated.
I think that all schools have got to have support systems in place for teachers when teachers are about to, feel like they're going to lose it. Like we have quiet areas for children to go to. I mean, sometimes the adult just needs to get away.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing more and more schools now putting into place systems where when the teacher is having difficulty and feels like they're really going to lose it, they can call on a support team, somebody that could even just come in for 10 minutes to let them go get a drink of water or something like that. And then I think teachers tend to get defensive when everybody is criticizing them for what they perceive they're doing wrong. I mean, there's nothing worse than you're trying your darndest and people are this, you wouldn't have problems. People don't need to hear that. They need sounding boards. They need, for instance, in Illinois, we operate a Solutions Sunday where teachers who are having behavior problems with children can come And this is over Zoom, although I will tell you, I did it for years in person with educators where they just had an avenue to come and talk about some of the problems that they were having with children with no criticism involved. With people saying, I hear, and how can we help you? So I think we've got to put more of those support systems uh, in place for educators. Yes, we have to train. There is no question. We have to train people. We also have to be so careful that we're really listening to what they're needing and we're providing the support uh,
Mhm.
for them. There is, I've done some sessions on the demoralization of teachers. And, as opposed to burnout blames the teacher. Demoralization says there's something wrong in the system. And
Right.
we have to look at what is wrong in the system. And just like when our children are having problems, our philosophy is, how can I help you? It needs to be the same way with our educators. That first year I taught, I would not have made it if it wouldn't have been for a social worker who came in at the end of every day and said, how'd it go today? No judgment, and I could just talk to her and bounce ideas off. I had somebody that was willing to listen.
Mhm.
So that's an excellent question, and a thing that really is concerning me now because I want to do everything possible to keep people in the field.
Right.
So the behavior momentum, again, you might be able to think of an example, but let's just take math, um, where you give 3 easy math problems and then you give the fourth one that is more difficult and they're more likely to be able to do it. And you positively reinforce them for being able to do it. That's like you always want to start your day with something the children do well. So I was working with a teacher and she wanted to do written journals, and she did written journals, and it was effective with some of the children, but this poor child who had a written expression problem, it was he'd come in the morning and then he'd rip up the journal because he wasn't going to do it because it was difficult. And that was that was when we, the way his day started. So we just had to look at other options for him. And then we talked about the behavior specific praise. Starting a task is hard for some of our students because many have executive function skills. So we've talked about behavior momentum, and try using the word pause instead of stop, meaning that you could come back to it. And then giving the children an example of what something looks like done. A visualization tool is a good one. Do the first 1 to 2 steps with them so that it's easier for them to move on. I also like to have the students rate the task on level of difficulty. How hard do you think this assignment is going to be? From 1 to 5, 5 being the hardest. And then invariably they're going to say 5, 5, it's too hard, it's too hard. Well, then they finish it and it's a 1. So they begin to see that how their perception of something being too hard might not be really the case. And then procrastination, when children are doing that, draw the child to the work environment with some of their favorite things. So, they like to do something and they'd like a water bottle. So can we give them a water bottle? Can they have the fidget? But what are some of their favorite things and how can we create the environment so they really want to do the task?
Okay, Bev, there's one more
Mhm.
question or
Great.
clarification. So I think kind of on the other end of the spectrum here, I guess is what it sounds like, kind of a clarifier of the teachers that are struggling to stay regulated and need the support. How about those teachers who tend to just veer towards that what sounds like very old school style of behavior modification where they're just yelling and directive? Have you found some success in training or any types of conversations you've had to get teachers like that to open their eyes or change their ways.
Right, right. Because, a lot of people say, well, I've always done it this way and this worked. With a lot of kids today, it doesn't work. I mean, so the authoritarian methods, are not successful with a lot of these children. The key, I think, is to give them, and what I try to do is to give them some relatively easy strategies to try so that they will buy in to those. I mean, I'm gonna say, well, you need to do da, 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 da. No, try this. Try be positive, be brief, be gone. And actually be in the classroom and model it being done so that they can see, how it does make a positive difference. And sometimes it's just awareness, because I know that I work with a lot of teachers, and when I talk about the whole issue of auditory processing, they say, oh, that some of our children now cannot process a lot of auditory information. Uh, it's just more difficult. We have more children with anxiety, etc. So giving them the little tips, that can build them up for success as well. Excellent
That's
question.
Thank you.
And then have you ever reinforced a student and the student acts up and you wonder why? Well, and a number of students will. And so what we tend to do when we reinforce a child for something and they act up? We say, well, forget that. I'll never give them another praise statement again. What's the worst thing we could do? What it says to us is that these children have a deficit in the area of accepting compliments. They're not used to being reinforced, and they're going to do everything possible to set themselves up to show that you're just like everybody else. So the worst thing we could do would be to back off and not reinforce. Again, what we need to do is teach them how to accept a compliment. That is a lifelong social skill. Very important. And then avoiding power struggles. Remember, I talked about empathy, acknowledge, don't deny their feelings. Because if they're saying something is too hard for them, they don't want to hear somebody say, well, for crying out loud, we did this on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's not Friday. You ought to be able to do that. It's easy. No, no, no. It is not easy for them. Recognize, okay, you're telling me this is hard. How can I help you with that? And then always using I statements. Behavior specific dialogue would say, make no more than 2 requests of the student. If they don't do it, then it's whatever the consequence is. And then choice. Choice is a wonderful empowering tool. You can do this assignment with a red pen or a green pen. They're more likely to do it. That's a pretty easy intervention. That is really a tier 1 intervention, but sometimes people forget that we have to give children opportunities for choice. And this is an example of what not to do. We're going to sit here until all of you settle down, and I don't care how long it takes. Well, you might be there a long time. And so that's sometimes when you have to resort to choice. And then it's all in how you say it. As request that they start something and help them start it if they're having trouble with it, or could instead of should. It's a little word, but it makes a difference. So it's your choice. I know you can make a good decision. Calm and a slower rate of speech, because remember, they're not processing the information. And then emergency plans, because we have to have emergency plans. So if a child is hurting self or others, when you can't wait 60 school days until an evaluation is completed. So you say, where's a calm space for the student, in the room or outside the room? But I think you have to say, where is a calm space for this child when they are no longer regulated? And will the other students be removed, or will the disruptive student be removed. All of those things have to be decided ahead of time. And then who can be called for help and what support is available for the teacher. So this is just something to remember, a little indicator that increases aggression. You think it's teachers sitting at the desk, unclear directions, number of teacher reprimands, or I don't know. Want to take a guess at that one?
I wish there was an all of the above.
Right, there should have been an all of the above, but the number one, when you go into classrooms and you see quite a bit of misbehavior, it's the number of teacher reprimands, because the more the teacher reprimands, the more the child misbehaves. So,
Which one of the attendees guessed that, number 3? So awesome.
okay. So emotional regulation, we have to spend a lot of time co-regulating with children. We have to model that. And so I'm just going to talk about one of these, which is cathartic dump. I'm very big on this because when you're upset about something, you have to have a way to get your feelings out in an appropriate way. That's why I'm a firm believer in art, the visual arts, are writing poetry, drawing a picture about something, coming up with a piece of music. But until children can dump what's bothering them, their working memory is not intact. So we have to find avenues to help them with that, making sure we meet their sensory needs, exercise, grounding. 45-second pause is a really easy intervention. And I'll tell you, I even use this with my college students. If I had to give a test, I would have them close their eyes for 45 seconds and think of something that made them happy. And Tanis Bryan out of the University of Illinois did that research and said they'll do better on the test. That's a pretty easy intervention for students. So just some emotional regulation things. This is because I talked about cathartic dumping, letting children get things out, a whole variety of ways that they can do those things. So just some suggestions to think about. And then now I want you to think of 2 takeaways for you. And then we're going to wrap up because we're almost out of time.
While attendees are typing, I'll share for myself that 45-second pause when you first brought it up. I thought, oh my gosh, that's so long. I thought you meant like wait for them on how to respond, and because it's hard for people to wait and that silence is really hard. But I love that idea before a difficult task of telling someone to imagine something, think about something that makes them happy and give them that time. And I think that's really hard sometimes in education, because it's like, well, we've got to cover all these tasks today. So that's a big reminder for me, a big takeaway, I think, and even helpful to with my interactions with my own child. Let's see, someone has responded. The Q-tip, important not to take behaviors personally. It allows you to start fresh each day and not worry about yesterday. I
When
work.
it's over, it's over. Don't
Yeah.
carry over.
Yeah.
Something that happened on Tuesday, we're not gonna, it's gone. It's
Mm-hmm.
over. Let's focus on good day today.
Nice. Someone shared, I work with teachers. I see all the things you were discussing. So her takeaway is the be brief and the move away. Another one shares the taping yourself to be more aware of your directions, positive comments, and reprimands. That self-awareness is really hard. So I like that one too.
It is hard.
Recognizing that adults' regulation highly impacts the student's emotional regulation.
Very true. Very true.
Someone else says taping yourself is crazy good. So being able to watch that back, I'm sure it's super enlightening because you don't realize what it is you're doing always in the moment. Someone else shares, be brief and be gone. I tend to want to talk and hover. Becca, I'm the same, which is why I appreciate my own personal child when she'll just tell me, get away now.
Mhm, mhm.
Someone else shares, I am going to work on the private corrections rather than the class-wide.
Yeah, because children with ODD, if you do it publicly, uh, they're gonna get you. I mean, they don't like that.
I can see why, especially if they're not liking that negative attention, negative feedback. Some kiddos are looking for any sort of attention, but
Right.
embarrassing them is not it. So that makes sense. It's just not, I get where Christina's coming from in terms of wanting to make sure and remind class members that's the expectation. But if the other people aren't doing it at the time, I can understand why you also need to do that individual private correction. And I think that's it on the feedback for this part.
Okay. So we'll close with stop resistance from students by building relationships with them and setting positive and clear expectations, providing supportive assistance. Remember the empathy and the optimism, involving the students, providing them structure. All educators should know children's processing time. I will tell you, I worked with a young man, 17, and he had a 90-second processing time. And people immediately thought he just was being obnoxious, not doing something. And it wasn't that at all. He just couldn't process information quickly. And then antiseptic bouncing, sometimes we have to remove the child, from a situation, divert their attention, so to speak. Always use their names in a positive way. Cathartic dumping, giving them an outlet for expressing their emotions that is appropriate, and engaging our students. So, any other questions? Because thank you. It's been my pleasure to share some ideas with you. And I appreciate all everybody does each and every day, because I know firsthand it is difficult. But we all are in this together, and we're all learning together.
This was wonderful. Someone has shared, thank you. This was fabulous. Um, thank you. Great information. I love the takeaways, and kind of also asking people to really think about what their takeaways are, and just these quick tips is always super helpful. Sharing the research, but also paired with the practical implications is wonderful. Can you share your website one more time? I saw that you,
Oh, sure, sure. It's
website.
www.bevjohns.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank
I
you.
We shared earlier that we will, all of these recordings, these webinars get archived on our website at okcirc.org, under programs and services and Wisdom Wednesday, and then there's an archived button. So this should be here soon. Once we have everything from this school year archived, we will post on our social media. So facebook.com/okcirc or okla on Instagram. So we'll post that out so that you guys can have access to all of these. And Dr. Johns, this was so great. We appreciate your time and your efforts and your engagement with our stakeholders. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. My pleasure to be here with you all.
And all the attendees look forward over the summer. We will restart our Wisdom Wednesdays for next school year. I'm thinking the first one will probably be in September, but we will post when those are starting and post the schedule. So thank you all so much for attending. Appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Dr. Johns.
Thanks to everybody for coming.